Hello. Yeah, welcome to all of you who are here in person, as well as those elsewhere, in various parts of the world who are part of this unmaking and making of history. For me personally, it's a unique moment in my life, with the privilege that time has given me to be here in Berlin, Germany, on this very day to address a crime, not just against my indigenous Beto nation in West Africa, against all African people, indeed against all of humanity. When some people who thought they were above human arrogated to themselves so much power to want to meet here as the so-called great powers of the world at the time and destroy millions of lives of people they had never set their eyes upon, but whom they considered not human beings enough to continue their shaping of their own lives in self-determination. And the arrogance of their abuse of power was such that there was no consultation with even the peoples of Europe in whose name they were misruling and in whose name they were making those atrocious criminal decisions. And this is why when scholar activists within my indigenous Beto nation decided to propose the idea of meeting on this anniversary of the 140th anniversary of such criminality, we were thinking not just about many African people, the best of the sons and daughters of our Mother Africa, who gave their lives in resistance to the perpetration of this one of the most heinous genocidal crimes, but also those of the progressive forces of Europe, those who opted out of white privilege at the time, in continuity of their standing up for humanity, in resistance to these crimes of colonialism that were being perpetrated in their name. And it is in honor of our African and European sheroes and heroes that we are holding today's event. All these years, 140, nobody has seen it fit to bring the peoples of Africa and of Europe together to critically examine not the past impact of this criminality, but also the still ongoing devastation of lives that a decision that was made 140 years ago in this city, against the wills of our people, continues to wreak. So we are here because hopefully we are responding to this proposal from my indigenous nation, supported by other African indigenous community activists, progressive forces across the world who identify with a need now for the peoples of the world to meet in people-to-peoples dialogue, to try with our own people's power to begin to critically reason through this criminality that has persisted all these years and master the strength and courage to build the power with which we can write new pages of history to correct this criminality. And this is the main solemn reason why we are gathered here today. And thank you for choosing to be part of this modest attempt by people to make history, but with a clear understanding that the only history that has stood the test of time is a history that ordinary people of conscience have chosen to write. The best pages of history are those that ordinary people, out of their conscience, felt dictated, to write. And this is what we are attempting to do right now. Thank you for being there. I'll pass on to, so a co-chairing this is Laura. Without Laura and Tobias, we wouldn't have had the anchor in Germany to do this work, because most of us who started this either are in West Africa or Britain. And it took some time, thanks to Tobias, to connect us with Laura, for us to have the anchors here in Germany, who also, in the tradition of the best daughters and sons of Germany, agreed with us that we could do something about this criminality. So thanks to Laura. And then we have Sydney Scott, a daughter of Africa, but born outside the continent. Again, some of the heinous crimes committed against African people, tearing so many of the best daughters and sons away from the continent. We met in London at the annual reparations conference, and she also decided to join us. So she's assisting us to co-chair this event. So Laura, over to you now.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. Also from my side, it's really a pleasure and an honor to be here today with you. It's been a long journey, but a really good one. And yeah, I'm really moved that we all gathered here today now. Also, my warm welcome to all the satellite events that are happening simultaneously in several parts of the world, in Burkina Faso, in Ghana, in Colombia, and in Mexico. And yeah, we have also been experiencing various challenges with internationalist organizing. Many of you will know these challenges. And I really want to mention that I'm really sad and angry that many of our delegates couldn't come here today because of the racist visa regime. And I'm still super honored that we have 3 delegates from South Africa and Ghana, but I was really angry about the last weeks. Yeah, so I think my task is mainly to do, first of all, a thank you to especially you who have all come here. And then my biggest thanks also to the SPORE initiative. Without them, this all wouldn't have happened at all, especially to Ezra and to Magdalena, who made this happen here. So SPORE is a very, very important space here in Berlin, and yeah, my biggest thanks to them. I also want to say a lot of thank you to the translators who make this event a lot more accessible. If you need translation, please at the registration desk, there will be the technical stuff. Thank you to also all the helping hands at the registration desk. Thank you to everyone who is involved in making this happen behind the scenes as moderators on Zoom, on Facebook. We're live streaming this also on YouTube. And if you can offer any help, we would be really happy if you have any capacities. So a few words on housekeeping, just to make this very quick. If you need translations, please go to the registration desk. And there's channel 1 if you need to listen in English, and channel 2 if you want to listen in German. And yes, in German. Wenn ihr Übersetzung braucht, bitte kommt nochmal zur Anmeldung. Es gibt den Channel 1, wenn ihr auf Englisch hören möchtet, und den Channel 2, wenn ihr auf Deutsch hören möchtet. The other way around? Okay, sorry. Okay, the other way around. I'm very sorry. Es ist genau andersrum. Channel 1 für Deutsch, Channel 2 für Englisch. If you have questions, please announce beforehand in which language you will be speaking from the audience. And to the speakers, please speak slow, close to the mic, and do have breaks so it will be easier. We will have a break at around 6:30 before we will start with the second half of the evening. You can buy yourself drinks at Café Arakil. And tonight, you're also very warmly invited to stay with us for a little get-together. There will be vegan West African food from a solidarity kitchen here in Berlin. They will also announce themselves later as soon as they arrive at 6:30. So for more information on accessibility and awareness, we've put together a document you will find printed on the website or at the registration desk. We have also 2 amazing awareness persons from SPORE who will be there if you're in any distress or if you have any questions, any help. Please maybe raise your hands. I can't see it at the moment. Yeah, thank you so much for being here with us today. That's great. And last but not least, maybe you have noticed that there's also a small exhibition at the registration desk. Abeni will maybe introduce themselves later. Abeni is an artist and has created these wonderful pieces in the hall. You can also get postcards for donations for projects in Congo and Ghana. And with this, I want to say again, a very, very warm welcome to PARISC, the Pan-African Reparationist Internationalist Standing Conference, who will be hosting this event today. And I'm very, very happy that we made our way here. You want to introduce?
Hi, everyone, and a final warm welcome. I am honored to be here. I hope you are as well. We are here with our eyes on a horizon for what is coming. Reparations, reparatory justice, repair, learning it intimately and practicing it immediately. So I know you all will enjoy and learn alongside us for the duration of this conference. Thank you so much for being here.
We will now observe the traditional African ceremony of pouring libation. It's been done in our Gbe language of the indigenous Beto nation in West Africa. by one of our high priests, Avleto Avleno Ashagbo. Now, it's important to indicate that he was supposed to be part of the delegation from Ghana that would, was mandated to be present, today. We have Sister Kofa and Brother Obie, who were the only ones, who managed by sheer luck and also
So don't worry about it.
to come through. And that in itself must be noted as the continuing criminality of the Berlin Conference that erected, walls between not just African people, but also between African people and the rest of humanity. But we are here to break down those walls. And that they are here is one of the significant gains in this process of undoing, the harms of the 1884-1885 Berlin Conference. They represent whole communities, of peoples. And on behalf of these communities, in honor of our African ancestors and the best heroes and heroes of humanity who have always stood against the division of our human family, Avleto Avleno will pour libation.
We are hearing here. So.
bedzira agbe no enya sie nye ka nyo edzidzi ogblɔ ne miatɔ yevu le afi ma ɖe exɔe dem yi ke miaƒe habɔbɔ he eprediv habɔbɔ wonye habɔbɔ yi ke ayi ŋgɔgbe enuwo na sɔgbe míawo hã etsɔ dziɖuɖuwo na bo nu yiwo biam mie la alo nu yiwo gblɔm mie la yi koe nye nu yi ke yɔ yi koe biam mie le lo yi me tsi kɔm mie le no mo xɔna la ame dome o miatɔe nye wonye mi ko tsi aɖe awo enye ya ke ko le tsia ŋu ɖe yi ko le aha hã gake aha me xɔ ɖo ya ke tɔtɔe ya ha edzo ne ma ɖe be nu ya wɔm mie le magadzedze ne mie mu ɖe ŋu mianɔ ha mie mu ɖe ŋu tsiri ne gblɔ miaƒe nya vɔ ɖe ne nɔ ha ko ne trɔ ʋuʋu ɖe dɔ me ŋutɔ ne nɔ gbɔgbɔ o ɖe vie be nu ya wɔm le wova le gbe ma fie nu ya wɔma mɔ va le wo fie o ŋutɔ ne trɔ ʋuʋu ɖe dɔ yo mako sese
to stop the video, to participate, to discuss, to react, to share, to register all come on the title, application, notice, and class.
I wish I could have translated each and every word, from our Gbe language to you. But, in short, it is to wish us well and calling upon our ancestors, and of course, the Supreme Being, to intervene and protect us and make sure that, we achieve the purpose, successfully of this event and go forward, and everybody, derives successes from the success of this event. In short, that's what it is. Now, amongst the delegates from Ghana who should actually have been presiding over this is Nufiala Kojogapa, one of our outstanding pedagogues who's taught many years in schools in Ghana, who is now an elder, one of the elders of our indigenous Bethel nation, who actually in his family experiences this division caused by the Berlin Conference, because his father actually is in that part of our Beduko homeland called Togo, which is now French-speaking, as part of taken away from the German colonialists after the defeat, of Germany in 1945. So he can't be here with us, but we wanted to register his presence amongst us as head of the presidium of honorary people that we've selected from various parts, of the world, to oversee this event. And it is on behalf of those people that we are acting, here. We'll go straight on to the first video presentation from Ntifafa Explo Nani Kofi, a close colleague of mine who co-chairs the Pro-Nkrumah Unity Movement, in Ghana, and who also comes from the indigenous Beto Nation.
explore Nani Kofi from the Nkrumah Unity Movement and Ghana in Planet Repairs Action Dialogue. Greetings to all the participants at this Africa and Europe People-to-People Planet Repairs Action Dialogue International Forum, which is coinciding with the 140th anniversary of the Berlin Conference. I first want to touch on the ethno-linguistic group which I belong to and take it from there in terms of what the scramble and partition for Africa has had on our people. There are not many nations or ethnic groups in Africa which have been battered by the so-called scramble and partition of Africa as the Bedouko group, which was originally in Nigeria and shifted westwards to where it is today as a result of the expansion of the Yoruba kingdom. Between the 13th and 15th centuries, the Bedouko group broke down into the Ebe, Fon, Aja, Tado, and Ogun or Egun groups. The Ebes are in Nigeria, Benin, Togo, and Ghana. The Fons are in Benin, the Ajas are in Benin and Togo, the Tados are in Togo. Ogun, also known as Egun, are in Benin, Nigeria, and Togo. In the 16th century, Ga and Fanti immigrants who had fled from where later became the Gold Coast and arrived in Aneho integrated with the Ebes from Gleji and Ajas originally based there. This integration developed a new variant of Be language influenced by their original languages, by Ga and Fanti, and later even by European languages such as Portuguese, French, and German. This is Mina, which has become the dominant form of spoken Ewe in Togo and spoken in parts of Benin. The earliest European contacts with the Bedouko were on the coast. Between 1720 and 1730, the Danes and the Dutch vied for influence on the Anglo coast, centered on Keta, where the Danes built the Fort Prinsenstein. The Portuguese landed in Benin in 1472. The Germans reached inland areas in Peki in 1847 as missionaries. The other early contacts were mainly trade relations. The French reached the Kingdom of Dahomey in 1872 and in 1892 colonized the area. The British took control of the every part of the English-speaking part of the territory at that time, every part of the Gold Coast in 1874 and took control of it from the Dutch, Swedes, Danes, and Germans. On 5th May 1884, German soldiers under the imperial officer Gustav Nachtigal kidnapped some community leaders from Aneho aboard a German warship, Move, and forced them to sign the protection treaty. The Germans also, they signed with King Lapa, who himself was a descendant of the Gans and Fantis who had fled Gold Coast and had come to Aneho. The Germans also then created Togoville, specially as a town, as the operational base for colonization. From there, they took over Lomé, which was a town set up by elders from Angola, then taking it over and putting it in a different country from those who had inhabited the place and those who have created the place. The area became one, the area therefore, which is the Bedouko area, became one of proxy war between the British and the Germans. The Germans expelled Togbe Dagadu III of Pando to Cameroon in 1914 and only returned in 1920 after the German colonial rule in Togoland came to an end. following the First World War. The British also expelled Pastor Andreas Aku, who hailed from Pele and was sent to Fernando Po, now Bioko, Equatorial Guinea, and only returned in 1930. A student house of residence in Mali Senior High School, Bo, Ghana, is named after this Pastor Andreas Aku. Many in Ghana or elsewhere know of King Prempeh I being deported to Seychelles, but not the Beduko deportation. Beduko got divided among British, Germans, and the French, then now between French and the Equatorial Guinea, and only returned in 1930. A student house of residence in Mali Senior High School, Bo, Ghana, is named after this Pastor Andreas Aku. Many in Ghana or elsewhere know of King Prempeh I being deported to Seychelles, but not the Beduko deportation. Beduko got divided among British, Germans, and the French, then now between French and the British. There are a lot of legacies of enslavement and colonization. They are manifold. Being brief, I'll just list them. Cultural disruption and erasure, which affects our whole character of the type of people we are. Social inequality and racism as a follow-up to enslavement and colonialism. Political instability and authoritarianism. Political instability actually because of the tensions within the colonially created microstates, where the centripetal forces are less than the centrifugal forces, precisely because the attachment to sections which are culturally closer to one another across the border, and then as a result of that, what becomes tribalism within the countries and the difficulty of running politics. And as such, the authoritarianism comes in when democratic structures cannot function. Economic underdevelopment, because colonialism actually developed these colonies as an extension of the metropolis from which the colonizers came from. And so it negatively affected the development of these areas. Environmental degradation, precisely because there wasn't priority for what has to be done with the fiscal environment, it led to environmental degradation. And the language which is used, the colonial language, came to replace the language, so even leading to what may appear to be the death of certain language, have disparities. Infrastructure and technologies have also depended on the colonial authorities. Border disputes and conflicts. Not only disputes and conflicts, if you look at places like Mwepe in Ghana and Georgia, Mwepe in Togo and Georgia in Ghana, the border sometimes even goes through people's kitchens. And you go to Wodome, which is also on the Ghana-Togo border, where they have their well drinking water on one part of the border and then cemetery on the other part of the border. All these things are disorganized. And the psychological trauma and collective memory, the psychological trauma of colonialism, the psychological trauma of playing second fiddle to other races and nations. See, and this is why we have to look at cases of restitution and compensation. But we have to be very careful when we talk about compensation. It does not necessarily mean that we should just pack some bag of money and give to certain people. Well, reparation should be a form of redistribution, challenging global economic inequalities, decolonizing economies, and the role of the states have to be looked at, because the state, which is a product of colonialism, definitely continues the culture of colonialism, and that is why there has to be struggles for equality. As I introduce myself as from the pro-Nkrumah unity movement, we build ourselves on the legacy of the first president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah. The first president of Ghana, Kwame Nkrumah, in his first speech to the United Nations, talked about the need for just restitution. Just restitutions, which means that redressing the inequalities, so things will come back to the stage in which human beings who have been dehumanized will not continue being dehumanized, and there can be a way in which we can all develop together in harmony. And one aspect of his legacies that we take very seriously is the positive action movement of the 1950s, through which was the main event which forced the success of Ghana's independence. Nkrumah clearly understood that colonial structures cannot advance the cause of the peoples of Africa. And that is why he tried everything to build an alternative to the colonial structure which he inherited through the educational system, through the health system, the ideological institutes, the industries that he built, the workers' brigade, and all those things which laid the basis for building an alternative to the colonial system. And so we are building on that legacy. As a result of that, we see planet repairs, which this will addressing the inequalities and inequalities, and also the disruption between human relations as one pillar. Also, the disruption between human relations as one pillar, and then dealing with the physical environment and the environmental degradation, which I mentioned earlier on as part of the legacies of colonialism. And we have been through that. We have been using the grassroots approach. Part of the grassroots approach is the introduction of Pan-Africanist and Planet Repairs street parliaments, where we get ordinary people who would not have had the opportunity to be in parliament or district assemblies, contribute their views, and so that we can be building an alternative. We have also setting up what we call UNESCO GEC clubs and UNESCO green clubs, which we are setting up in schools. We are also setting it up in the communities. And then we also have cooperation with various organizations. The Ghana in Planet Repairs Action Dialogue, which I talked about, to work together with the Nkrumah Unity Movement, the African Continental Unity Party, and other forces in building what we call the Positive Action Citizens Coalition. The Positive Action Citizens Coalition now is developing a partnership with the Trade Union Congress of Ghana, and with active participation from the General Transport Petroleum Chemical Workers Union and Public Utility Workers Union, who are very active in the anti-privatization campaign we have just initiated. This grassroots campaign will be able to help us work across the borders. One of the things we do is the work across the ethno-linguistic areas. Say, for example, the Gbeduko, that we try to work all across the Gbeduko boundaries. And because we realize that when Nkrumah said the independence of Ghana is meaningless unless it was linked with the total unity of the African continent, it is only African unity which will solve this problem. The facts that are present with the Gaddafi-initiated African Union, we have a skeleton. What to do with it is how to deal with the skeleton, so that the actual body around the skeleton is one that advances the cause of revolutionary Pan-Africanism or radical African unity, a borderless Africa, where we have one Africa, one voice. And so we are thinking even about things of common trade fair along the borders, of people who used to work together as a people before the intervention of the Europeans, which have destroyed the kind of unity which existed among the Gbeduko and these languages, which are very, very close to one another. Is the pro-Nkrumah Unity Movement, which is spearheading this action of the Positive Action Citizens Coalition. These grassroots activities will help us in addressing the disunity which has been created by the European intervention and invasion, and also help raise the consciousness of people so that through our UNESCO GEC clubs, through our Pan-Africanist and Planet Repairs street parliaments, we will build the embryo of the future society, which will be an alternative to the exploitative society which colonialism and enslavement have introduced. One Africa, one voice.
Our next speaker is luckily here in person. I'm really happy to introduce Bafta Sabo, who is a writer, educator, and activist, and just recently published a new, not really recently, but quite recently, published a new translation of Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. And we're really happy to have you here.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to talk about the, maybe to a little bit of the context of my speech, to talk about the discourse on colonialism in Germany a bit critically. So in the past 5 years in Germany, and I think also in a lot of other Western states, there have been an emerging critical discussion on colonialism and also like Germany's colonial past that I want to shade like light on in a critical sense, because I think especially in a lot of political circles where people have been working on colonialism for a longer time, I think a lot of people have been very happy about the fact that colonialism has been addressed in Germany, but I think it's important to ask in which way is colonialism addressed, who talks about it, and why do they talk about it, and which way. So this is the context in which my speech is to be understood. 140 years ago, the Congo Conference took place in this very city in Berlin. And colonialism at that time took a new stage where Western European states took direct control over African states. And with the emergence of the capitalist world market, different regions of the earth are no longer seen as separate, self-contained worlds, but one coherent world emerges, one global context, which haven't been there before. And this global context is not held together by like an all-encompassing political system, but by the global division of labor within the capitalist mode of production. The accumulation of the first capital was not, as many bourgeois economists like to claim, a process that was connected to the thrift and rationality of the first capitalists, but was based on violent expropriation. A decisive moment was the colonial system. So the treasure captured outside Europe directly through plunder, enslavement, and robbery flowed back into the mother country and was transformed into capital there or here. In the colony, the production conditions that were established and the social power and the domination relationships differed a bit from the class societies we had in Europe, because you could see that the class division and the exploitation within the African states were maintained by direct political control and direct violence, contrary to Europe, where political control was mainly maintained through bourgeois law, concepts like human rights and so on. Walter Rodney, in his famous book, you already mentioned, How Europe Undeveloped Africa, also mentions how colonialism was not motivated by racism or an European superiority complex, but rather a need for cheap labor and resources. Racism is rather intended to justify the exploitation and the oppression that is necessary for this extraction of labor and resources. And the purpose of racism was more to construct a world in which you had this global division of labor, but this is not seen as a form of social organization, but the expression of natural, biological, or cultural differences that existed in the natural world. And this does not only justify exploitation, but it constructs a world in which a certain population, in this case the African population, is naturally considered to be the working class, and global class society is naturalized and no longer questioned because everybody's kind of at the place where they are naturally supposed to be. So Europeans are intellectuals, so they are predestined to organize production. Africans are not as intelligent, but strong and built biologically different, so they are their natural place in society is doing physical labor, especially on the plantations in the Americas, where enslaved African labor was used to produce goods for European capital. While colonialism was formally ended in the 50s and 60s, we can still find these kinds of racist images of Africa and Africans to exist. But in many European societies, a debate on the colonial history and structural racism in their own societies has emerged. And the way these topics are discussed is, however, not unproblematic. So in 2017, French President Emmanuel Macron sparked a debate on European guilt and the coming to terms with colonialism with a speech in Ouagadougou in Burkina Faso. This was followed by a report in 2018 on the restitution of colonial loot. This report also sparked a discussion in Germany on the restitution of colonially stolen goods. In this context, Germany's foreign minister Annalena Baerbock traveled to Nigeria in December 2022. And the reason that was given for her visit was the return of the Benin bronzes. The bronzes were stolen by the British Army almost 130 years ago as colonial loot and then sold to Germany and displayed in German museums. In her speech in Nigeria, Baerbock announced that there's an emerging new chapter of international friendship and like a new chapter of relations between Europe and the African continent, especially Germany and the African continent. And this speech was, I think, taken very positively as a kind of gesture of reapproachment. And I think it also fed this narrative that Germany is one of the only countries in Europe that critically reflects their own history. I think when you're outside of Germany, this is the way people talk about Germany as this like critical country. And when you grow up in Germany, this is also the way that Germany understands itself as one of the only countries that had a critical understanding of their own history. And this act by Annalena Baerbock was also understood in this context. But the visit was not entirely selfless on Germany's part, surprisingly, because Nigeria is an important economic and political partner for Germany on the African continent. It is the second largest economy after South Africa, and it's the largest oil producer in Germany, in Africa. And also in the past, Nigeria had signaled that it wanted to switch to renewable energies and has, in this context, also grown closer to China, which Germany obviously sees as a competitor on the African continent. The Federal Republic also doesn't want to solve Germany's energy crisis by reorganizing the production in some way, but they just want to switch to renewable energies. And Nigeria could be an important contributor to this. Nigeria is also considered a relatively pro-Western country on the African continent, and they have signaled that they want to be seen as a kind of mediator between the West and several regions in Africa, like the Sahel regions, where you had different coups, also Ethiopia, that have kind of moved away from the West. And Nigeria is seen as a country that kind of mediates this conflict and is more closer to geopolitically pro-Western perspectives. So these are factors why it's of interest to Germany to grow closer to Nigeria. The governments of both countries also want to work closer on migration policy, which means the deportation of African migrants. What is particularly cynical is the fact that on the same day the Benin bronzes were returned to Africa with much public attention. with no public attention, there was a mass deportation from Germany to Lagos, Nigeria's largest city. And Nigeria has also expressed in the past that they want to kind of conduct camps for deported migrants on the African continent, where they kind of aid Western powers in deporting migrants from Europe to Africa and facilitating this with an infrastructure on the African continent. So we can see that Germany wants to grow closer to a lot of countries in the African continent, and the reason they are giving is this like critical reflection of their own history, but what is behind this is actually economical and political interests that serve mainly the interests of Germany and Europe, and are actually contrary to the interests of the majority of people on the African continent. So what does this mean, like nowadays, in times where colonialism is formally over, but we can still see some continuities of colonialism today? So in addition to his famous work, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, Walter Rodney also wrote a series of political essays on decolonization in the 70s, after most African countries have been decolonized. And he asked, what does decolonization mean for African states in a context where they already have achieved political independence? He comes to the conclusion that decolonization cannot mean replacing European rulers with one's own rulers, because material living conditions of most Africans have not changed after decolonization. And today, I think we can also see that in a lot of contexts, Africa is actually more underdeveloped today than it was 50 years ago. So it has only not changed, but also gotten worse in some sense. Frantz Fanon also points to this difference when he says that in The Wretched of the Earth, that the anti-colonial struggle, which primarily addresses the political colonial rule, cannot replace the social struggle for property relations and the organization of society. The debate on colonialism and the example of the return of the Benin bronzes shows above all what international relations look like in the post-colonial era. Although colonialism was formally ended in almost all countries in the 1960s, the rule over African states continues by other means. Institutions such as the European Union or its predecessor, the European Economic Community, or other international institutions as the International Monetary Fund or the World Bank play a strategic role here. These relationships are characterized by constant economic dependence, high level of debt, and political tutelage of African countries, which also always involve military intervention by European states. A term such as no-colonialism, coined by Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana, which we already have heard about, attempts to describe this specific form of imperialist rule, a political rule without the manifest conquests of old colonialism, and in some senses is also more efficient than the old colonialism. However, the debates that are taking place in Germany and most former colonial powers under the term decolonization completely ignore this reality. They primarily address cultural issues and want to decolonize curricula or public spaces in large cities. And of course, dealing with the cultural legacy of colonialism and the racist chauvinism that accompanies is politically relevant. But this approach suggests that a different attitude would be needed for a comprehensive decolonization. The decisive factor, however, would be to question the post-colonial foundations of the capitalist world market and combat them organized and politically. Thank you.
You very, very, very much. I will hand over to Kofi, I think.
we would like to go through the rest and hopefully have some time for questions, and comments and some discussion. So let's just run through the rest. Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. The next is Daniel Summers. Is he here? I didn't see him. I don't think Daniel is around, otherwise his presence, so we felt. So possibly tomorrow. We will now listen to Franklin Yamsi, Professor Franklin Yamsi, who is based now, lived in France, from Cameroon, originally lived in France, now in Mali. Can we have the video? Yes.
Africans, Pan-Africanists all over the world. I have been asked a contribution about the Pan-Africanist decolonization philosophy and how we can share, create, shape new concepts for the emancipation of African people all over the world. I think the first thing to do is to renew the consciousness of the deep African history. In our education programs, from the primary school to the university, we must put all our energy in rooting African individuals' consciences in a deep understanding and knowledge of the main steps of African history, not only on African continent, but also all over the world. By teaching that deep and long African history to our children, we will build citizens who are not only rooted in our family story, who are not only rooted in our national or continental or racial story, but we will have consciences rooted in the Pan-Africanist vision of African humanity. So that, in fact, somebody who is well educated in knowing the deep and the profound past of the African people, to African continent and to all its diasporas, will be able to challenge tribalism, clientelism, nepotism, all those things which are clearly some prisons for our minds in our different African countries. But the number two of the decolonization process is to teach to every student that it is very important for a free human being to shape and to create his own concepts by his experience, by his knowledge, and through the comparison of what he knows, what he has learned with what other people know, what other people have learned. So that comparative knowledge is very important for the African citizen of today. If you compare African knowledge to European knowledge or globally Western knowledge or Asian knowledge or American knowledge, you will see that there are three main categories which are fundamental principles of African way of thought. The category of truth, the category of justice, and the category of solidarity. These are the three permanent principles of African civilization. By truth, we mean seeking deep knowledge in each step of our lives. By justice, we understand that we have to give to everyone what
is his income in all the situations of the life. We have to impeach all kind of arbitrary fake rights in the society. We have to fight against inequalities between all the human beings, being them men or women. We have to work for social complementarity of women and men. And we have to enforce the traditional family built on the father, the mother, and the children. See, so for me, this is the second thing, help African people to be able to compare and to defend their own principles. And the third principle is the principle of solidarity, which means that never we must abandon one of ourselves on the road alone, without clothes, without house, without health, without education, without family, without love. With those three principles, we can renew the shape of our institutions, being them economic, political, spiritual, being them educational, and what else you can think. We have three fundamental principles, and those principles must inspire all the areas of our life. And this is the third level of the decolonization philosophical process, is to produce concepts that will help African people to fight against poverty, to fight against violence, and to fight against ignorance. Fighting poverty, violence, and ignorance is the work of an intellectual, an activist, a true Pan-Africanist militant. In every situation, we have to think twice and to ask ourselves if we have worked on the concept that is guiding our lives. Let me give an example of this method, and that example will be taken in my last book. I will just take that example in my last book. I've just published this book, and it will be translated soon in English and in many African languages. Imperial terrorism, which is the contemporary form of the Western and Middle East aggression against Africa, with irrefutable proofs of the aggression of the NATO against Africa. In this book, I have been shaping a new concept in two words: imperialism and terrorism. Imperial terrorism, what is it? It is a concept which is more thankful than the concept of jihadism. The concept of jihadism has been invented to cheat about reality. It is a fake concept, which means that Africa is attacked on religious basis, on religious goals by some fanatic Muslims who would like all Africans to be under the subjugation of their understanding of the Islamic religion. This fake conception of terrorism in Africa today has been developed by the NATO, by the European Union, on all mainstream Western medias. And it was done to hide the true organization of terror in Africa. So, as a philosopher, like an African Pan-Africanist and activist, like an African intellectual, I observed the situation and I understood that Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State are not fighting for religion. They are not forcing Muslims to become Muslims. What are they exactly doing? They have been created by Western intelligence services, CIA, the Mossad, and many European intelligence services are, in fact, the creators of those terrorist organizations. We have multiple proofs about the creation of Al-Qaeda in the 80s to fight against Soviet troops in Afghanistan. And we have many proofs today of the financing, arming, and helping given by main Western services like the CIA, like the USAID, and so on to those terrorist organizations. Just follow the declassified documents of these years. Just follow the WikiLeaks scandal investigation. Just have a look on the last
Trump administration's revelations about the open involvement of the most powerful Western nations in destabilizing Iraq, Syria, Libya, and finally all the Sahel and Africa through Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State, which are organizations financed by Western services. So when I created the concept of imperial terrorism, it was to put an end to the use of the concept of jihadism. Jihadism is a veil of ignorance invented by Western service to impeach the African intelligence to understand the reality of destabilization. But by thinking that we have, in fact, imperial terrorists, imperial terrorism confronting us, we are now able to name and to identify the enemy and to fight against him. You can't fight terrorism with the help of NATO's forces who have financed, invented, and who are arming those groups, giving them the best contemporary weapons. You cannot in Africa fight against terrorism by asking the help of those powers who supported terrorism, introduced terrorism, notably through the destruction of Libya, to impeach African people, to put an end to the dollar, euro, franc CFA currencies domination on our people. So through this book, I invented a concept to put an end to a confusion. And I think this is the goal of all the process of decolonization of African philosophy, African thought today. We have to build people able to create concepts and to confront life and affirm our own values of justice, of truth, and solidarity in all circumstances. This is for me an example of the way of decolonizing the minds by making in all African people, in all African individuals, a potential creator rooted in his own tradition. Because there is no universality without unicity, without originality. We are entering in the multipolar world where Africa will just have to affirm its own civilizational personality, its own values, and to produce its own prosperity through those values. There is no universalism which will be applied to all the people of the world. Universality, it is a quest of particular people, particular individual, particular civilization. There is no perfect civilization in the world. We just have to respect one between, we just have to have respect among ourselves, among our civilization, so we will have a peaceful earth. But this is not given. This is obtained by fight, by struggle, and by knowledge. Thank you very much. I wish you good works in Berlin, and I hope I told you my thoughts in my best possible English. Thank you. Have a good work in Berlin. I am Professor Franklin Nyamsi, wa Cameroon, wa Africa, President of the African Freedom Institute based in Bamako, Mali. Thank you.
Quickly, we will go on to Tobias, Ula, and then we can have Daniel. Okay, well, yeah. All right. Daniel has just come in good time, and we'll go straight. Yeah. Yeah. No. Are you ready, Daniel? Just, yeah, go on.
He has a presentation.
Yeah, okay. Okay. So let's have Tobias and then Daniel goes. Yeah.
Good evening and guten Abend. Feel free to come down also. There's plenty more seats down here. It's wonderful to see more people coming in, joining us this evening. And I'm happy to fill the gap while the presentation for the now is set up. I'd like to first thank the Pan-African Reparations International Standing Conference, PARISC, for initiating this conference and for the intellectual guidance in what we're doing here. And I would like to thank the whole Groundwork Action Bureau, especially Laura, Kofi, Kobana, Johanna, the media team, the Spore Initiative, for making this day possible. And working with the Groundwork Action Bureau and together also in the Extinction Rebellion, being the Change Affinity Network over the last years has been immense honor. And I'm still on a very steep learning curve working with the leadership of Esther Stanford-Kuzay, Kofi Maluklu, Kobina Amakwanda, and many others here in the internationalist Pan-African struggle and the ancestors calling us into this space. And they asked me to talk about 15 minutes or so about why we're holding this conference here, what planet repairs might mean, and some of the misunderstandings. And Bafta, I think, already pointed to some of those in the discourse about colonialism from that perspective. So first of all, I'd like to briefly talk about the name of the Africa-Europe Peoples to Peoples Planet Repairs Action Dialogue Internationalist Forum, the APRODIF. It was chosen deliberately to have that title to encompass the objectives and the vision. So over the last months, as you probably have seen in the media, there have been many creative and some really powerful efforts to commemorate the events of 1884-85, including a few miles from here in Berlin, where the conference actually took place. However, we have also seen the appropriation of anti-colonial struggle for planet repairs through the very same governments who refuse to even apologize for their crimes, let alone engaging in meaningful conversation about how to grapple with the terror European governments, or imperial terror, as we just heard, unleashed on the continent of Africa, and what this means for the relations between peoples, for people-to-people dialogue today. And why this shows that these histories can no longer be swept under the carpet, we should be mindful, as Amilcar Cabral reminds us, to tell no lies and to claim no easy victories. We have also witnessed a couple of grassroots efforts that focused on the commemoration of the conference and its legacies here in Berlin. The organizers said that they intended to restore the place of the conference in German, European, and world history, and to translate this into educational agendas and curricula. However, using the word legacies of the conference and colonialism risks that both the event and the period of colonialism is treated as something that belongs somehow to the past. And this reading, it might still affect the present, but it's luckily over. From the perspective of planet repairs, this is a dangerous misinterpretation. It is all too easy to confine the Berlin conference to a meeting of those 14 countries and their carving up of the map of the African continent. What is the first line of criticism of the Berlin conference that gets repeated by mainstream media these days? That no African people were present. While this observation, of course, indicates some of the colonizers' racist and exclusivist mindsets, we should not fall into the trap of only focusing on the lack of representation of African peoples, of women, of diversity as the main problem of the Berlin conference. This interpretation shows how the vision of the left today is often very confined in both our demands and our imaginary. Is that what we fight for? Really a world where some underrepresented groups are graciously invited to the halls of power, where they have a seat at the table, where we partition a continent, where we distribute licenses to extract and to kill, and where we give legitimacy to the civilizing missions of the white saviors, where it gets legally enshrined under the glittering lights of the chandeliers of a palatial ballroom. This sanitized version of a conference and its legacies erases the fact that in 1884, European powers had already plundered, dispossessed, kidnapped, tortured, and enslaved millions of African people for 300 years. The conscious underdevelopment of Africa, as Walter Rodney and Bafta pointed towards this as well, calls it, or with Eduardo Galeano, what we call the open veins of Africa, had already devastated the lands, cultures, sacred sites, and souls of peoples long before 1884. long before the coordinated efforts of turning the Congo Basin into what since has become possibly one of the most deathly zones on Earth. The extraction, the exploitation, and dehumanization did not stop with formal independence. Of course, when the newly printed national flags were raised across the continent, many settlers and colonial administrators hastily left the colonies. But the mine owners and the plantation entrepreneurs and the diplomats and the bankers and the aid workers and the missionaries, they stayed. In fact, no longer having to negotiate with power brokers in the metropole, via new post-colonial bourgeois elites, they had access to the continent in many ways even more rapidly. And the new bourgeoisie that Frantz Fanon in The Wretch of the Earth has warned so vehemently against, were in many cases happy to continue the socioeconomic status quo under colonialism, opening their resources, lands, and peoples to further incursions by international capital in their search for labor, resources, and new converts. While the political and legal constellations of colonialism have changed, the capitalist extractivism and white supremacy targeting African and Black life continues unabated today. The quest for green growth, rare earths, militarized conservation, and new markets, ever more parts of the African continent are turned into sacrifice zones. Sorry. Apologies to the translators. So the concept of planet repairs recognizes this as the condition of today. We live in the midst of an ancestral catastrophe of colonialism and slavery, and within the coming catastrophe of climate collapse. Planet repairs addresses this condition through three dimensions of justice: cognitive justice, environmental justice, and reparatory justice. Cognitive justice implies unveiling the myths of progress, growth, and what Vandana Shiva has called the monocultures of the mind that have shaped the colonial project, from the elder men of the East African Company to the tech bros in Silicon Valley today. What is needed is instead a turn towards pluriversality, what the Zapatista Army of National Liberation calls un mundo donde quepan muchos mundos, a world where many worlds fit. Centering the knowledge and wisdom of indigenous peoples and communities of resistance is central to planet repairs. This is why for the APREDIV, listening to and following to our many comrades from different communities of resistance in the African continent and the diaspora is key. And this is central to the idea of a people-to-peoples internationalist forum, because it was not only the peoples of Africa that were not present at the table in Berlin. It was also the downtrodden masses in the slums of Europe. It was in their names, in our names, that the aristocratic bourgeois and clerical class pursued their violent conquest. This means that the collective guilt of colonialism is another myth that the ruling classes are imposing on us, while many Europeans of all classes enthusiastically embrace colonialism. Let there be no mistake about that. There have always been those that fiercely resisted, from Rosa Luxemburg to August Bebel, Clara Zetkin to Willy Münzenberg. They were mostly socialists and communists, deeply committed to internationalism, that fought across the racial lines to overthrow capitalist imperialism. This second group of people is key to this conference as an internationalist forum. It is the stories of these freedom fighters that the conservative and liberal narratives frequently sideline, blaming all Europeans for the crimes that were orchestrated by a small class of wealthy profiteers. 1884 was not only the time of the scramble for Africa orchestrated by European elites, it was also the time of radical internationalism and anti-colonial resistance. It was the time of the rise of Marxism and the intensification of anti-colonial struggle. So the 1880s was also the time of a proud Dahomey empire in today's Benin resisting French incursions. It was the time of bloody processes of nation building in the so-called Mfecane in Southeast Africa, where Zulu armies held back British and Boer settlers for decades, including their victories over the colonists at the famous Battle of Inside Rwanda in 1879. It was also the time when the Germans pathetically failed to get a foothold in the lands of the Herero and Nama, outwitted by the seasoned anti-colonial fighter Henrik Witbooi, They struggled to make any inroads into the guerrilla warfare-trained Nama territories. Only later, the unspeakable violence of the Vernichtungsbefehl, the extermination order, and the establishment of concentration camps on Shark Island and Swakopmund subdued Herero and Nama resistance in what is considered the first genocide of the 20th century. So it's a common misunderstanding of the Berlin Conference that it relates only to the satirical image of kind of carving up the continent with a knife wielded by Chancellor Bismarck. The historical reality is more complex. But this is often used as an argument that this conference is less relevant, which is, of course, not the case. As been mentioned before, it was called the Congo Conference for a reason, because it was the pretext about the conflicts around the exploitation of the resources in the Congo Basin. You probably know about what happened in the Congo, so don't have to go into details here, but I think it's important to emphasize there was the Belgian king as a private individual owning and pushing peoples to get more and more rubber, to rape and torture the women in the villages in order to force the men out to get more rubber. It was a private, rich individual, a billionaire in today's words. And it is not their moral shortcoming, but the very fact that he was able and enabled to become so rich that is the structural problem today. I want to say two more things. The first one is about the question of borders and nation states, and the second one is about the heroes and sheroes that Kofi alluded to before. So the question of borders still haunts, as we heard, the continent today. And of course, they were formed before and after, not only at the conference itself, but 30% of the borders in the African continent are straight lines. Other times they go along rivers that cut through the hearts of communities and peoples. Nation states resulting from this process were set up to fail by cutting through indigenous peoples, as we heard, and nations cutting up the possibility of collaboration and resistance and pitting one group of people against each other, which then the European powers could exploit. The Pan-African movements that did arise, of course, as we heard, and sought to overthrow the nation-state order that this is built on, were often shut down by coups and killings like that of Patrice Lumumba, the coup against Kwame Nkrumah, and the assassination of Thomas Sankara. European colonizers transplanted the idea of the nation-state that had led to so much bloodshed in Europe to the African continent. The Ugandan scholar Mahmoud Mamdani has shown that the model of the nation imposed upon the world through colonialism and exclusionary logics lies at the heart of the political difference that defines the permanent minority, the outsider, and gives rise to ethnic cleansing. And we see this in the genocide of the indigenous people in the US, in the genocide, the Holocaust against the Jewish people. But you also see similar logics of exclusion, of nationalism, and of territorial exclusion in apartheid South Africa and in the devastation of Palestinian lives today. The Berlin Conference was also key in instituting colonial law as a subdiscipline of law, giving credence to the expropriation of the lands through concepts such as the terra nullius, the kind of the open and empty lands. And on the other hand, of course, the Orientalist images of African peoples, Orientalized peoples as savages, as overly driven by their needs, sexualized. And it is these images that still hang in the museums just over there, as the Nationalgaleries Delacroix, the Fanatics of Tangier, and many, many others. So this is also part of the epistemic and cognitive justice that Planet Repairs is for, to interrogate those and how they continue to inform our ways of thinking about the world. So to conclude, many of you, and we heard about them, many others will talk about the sheroes and heroes of resistance on the African continent. It is my task given to just briefly mention some of the people who chose differently because there was a possibility to do otherwise. It was not just a measure and a part of a certain time to be a racist colonialist. That is a narrative that is imposed on us, that it kind of temporarily justifies what people always have been, some people always have been resisting for. Rosa Luxemburg, most famously, was a Polish-German revolutionary, communist, and a feminist organizer. She was also an organic intellectual, contributing to one of the most important theories of imperialism. In her book, The Accumulation of Capital, Luxemburg argued that capitalism needs to constantly expand into non-capitalist areas, into non-marketized areas, in the constant need for new markets and surplus value and labor. And in the age of the mine, in the age of the Plantationocene, as it's been called today, rather than the Anthropocene as a terraforming force, this evermore exploitation of soils, of atmosphere, of oceans, this perspective of Luxemburg couldn't be more relevant today. Clara Zetkin was a German communist, anti-fascist, feminist activist, and an influential Marxist theorist. Zetkin later became the chairwoman of International Red Aid, an organization called the International Red Cross, providing material and moral support for class war political prisoners around the world. Willy Münzenberg was part of the Communist Party, supporting the Spanish Civil War and anti-fascist, and he led the League Against Imperialism, which was created in Brussels in 1927 already. Liga gegen Kolonialgräuel und Unterdrückung, League Against Imperial and Colonial Oppression. August Bebel, and I will finish with this example, was a socialist representing the St. Pauli working class neighborhood in Hamburg, only kilometers away from the manor houses along the Elbe, where the rich merchant family coordinated colonial trades. He was a fierce critic of German colonialism, and he brought the whips used by colonial administrators into the floor of the Reichstag. He decried Germany's rule in today's Cameroon, what was known as the 25 land. The colonial administration had regulated that 25 lashes with a sjambok, a whip made of hippopotamus skin, that in one lash could rip open the skin of a body, would be exactly the right amount to inflict unspeakable pain while not fully killing the tortured person in order to maintain their labor capacity to be exploited on the plantations. Instead of being paralyzed by the guilt over the horrors that have been committed in our names and by our ancestors, it is on us to recognize that the people have always made a stance against fascism and imperialism, and that these can be our ancestors in struggle too. And that this is what we base our action dialogue over the next days on, in creating our own internationalist community of resistance. A luta continua. Thank you.
Okay, we'll now call on Daniel.
And I think afterwards it would be great to hear a few questions, if there are questions in the room, and maybe a few contributions from you. And then we'll have a little break.
How do we begin? Yes. Let's take the presentation first. Is that okay? Okay, let's run it first.
Is there a presentation for Daniel maybe available? Want to start already with your presentation, or shall we wait? You can say hi. We're really happy to have you.
I have a question. Does anybody have a tissue? Hat jemand ein Tempo für mich? Ich habe meine zu Hause vergessen. It's often that I'm in front of a microphone, and I was thinking today, and also other times, I never know what I'm going to say when I get in front of it. In other words, I'm going to speak extemporaneously. I'm from Detroit, I went to a Catholic school. And the reason I mention it, I'll tell a little, I'll be anecdotal, actually. The school that I went to was, the grade school was called Blessed Sacrament. And it was administered by nuns from the Immaculate Heart of Mary, IHM. I didn't learn until a few years ago that this order of nuns had been established by a black mulatto from Haiti. And my great grandmother was born a slave. That's my voice. Yeah. What about the picture? Well, first, let me tell this anecdote in memory of her. Heavy chains.
Sorry, can we
Heavy
have the
chains cut
presentation
through
for?
my soul. The dreadful past just won't let me go. Sad, dark faces screaming from the grave. Niggas stand in line. You're still my slave. Do you hear them crying? Lives destroyed. Oh, whole world. Yeah, sure. That's me. Let me see that glasses. Yeah, well, anyway, so this woman, these women who I am eternally grateful rather, because for educating me, taking the time out to counsel me, school me, whatever had disciplined me, whatever I needed. And it dawned on me later in life what role they played in my life. I had one, I was in the second grade and I was in the third grade and I could look across the hall and see the next grade, the fourth grade. And the fourth grade was being taught by a nun by the name of Sister Georgina. She was like a drill instructor. You thought about the fourth grade and you considered or you contemplated whether or not you would meet the test. Actually, would you ever get out of the fourth grade? So everybody was terrified. I survived. I did survive, and I wrote a piece about her. And I'll tell you a little about it. And I said, at the end, I said, I'll always remember Sister Georgina. And I am grateful. I'll always remember her, but who will remember me? And she made a tremendous impression on me. In fact, she was the nun who trained the altar boys, and I was an altar boy. I was an altar boy. I spoke Latin, and I was in the choir. So I had the old 9 yards, and now I'm a faithful atheist. Sorry. So yes, that's just the way it is. And we won't get into that in this evening, but if you want to discuss that later, I can discuss that with you. Are you going to start from the beginning? I'm ready. Yes, ma'am. My great grandmother was born a slave. I wrote this poem, this song, in memory of her. Heavy chains. Heavy chains cut through my soul. The dreadful past just won't let me go. Sad, dark faces screaming from the grave. Niggas stand in line. You're still my slave. Do you hear them crying? Lives destroyed. A whole world dead and dying. You never said you're sorry. Only pain and death on the morrow. You stole our hopes, our dreams. It's a crime how little our lives mean. Bred and branded like helpless cattle, not once forgetting the coming battle. Without mercy, whipped to the bloody bone, the day will come when they must atone. Empires built on no more than lies, drowning in blood, but no one cries. Stinking foul ships sailing the seven seas, all is lost, my brothers and sisters, you and me. Do you hear them crying? Lives destroyed, a whole world dead and dying. Do you hear them crying? First, allow me to thank the organizers for inviting me to speak at this prestigious and important event. As the volatile global political situation deepens and at a pace that no one out of hand could predict with some level of certainty, the issues of war, climate change, and worldwide economic collapse plague us without the prospect of immediate remedy or relief. The handwriting is on the wall. Berlin repairs, to be or not to be? That is the question. But what is at the heart of the question? Personally, I would say that everyone should be committed to righting a wrong, an injustice, without reservation or hesitation, no matter what the span of time. This is a governing principle. Stop. The acquisition of cheap national resources and labor, bought and paid for by our suffering on so many levels throughout the centuries, and the beat goes on. There lies the rub. The brutal exploitation is still going on. It persists. So any discussion that attempts to obscure that fact is, in every sense of the word, bankrupt and indefensible. The essence of that process is predicated on the genocide and expropriation. The present U.S. government was and is an abomination, a threat to national and world security. The U.S. proclaims to be the leader of the free world. Nothing could be further from the truth. The term human rights for them is no more than a buzzword with no real substance. Corruption is the order of the day. No one can refute that. It is more than obvious. Coastal areas across the planet are in immediate danger of being swamped out of existence, and literally hundreds of millions are made homeless and destitute. One look at Los Angeles and Hollywood is a stark warning and sounds an alarm for those who want to hear and see and who want to face up to the hard and cruel facts. The so-called Western world, literally to sustain their wasteful and criminal system, takes an unfair amount of the world's resources to fuel their putrid system, leaving precious little to the rest of the world. It is the birthright of every inhabitant of this universe, and specifically Mother Earth, the only home we know, to share in the benefits and the wealth of human civilization. Thank you. You're clapping for yourselves, actually, because we have to save the world. This is our task. Oh, yeah, I was thinking about the Catholic school. We had, I don't know, it necessarily was it a history class? I don't know, or general discussion or religion class, keeping in mind that this mulatto established this order of nuns. One nun began to talk about slavery. And well, I'll get to the point. She said, she described the slaves and their lives, and she said, well, they were happy. At that moment, I became a revolutionary. At that moment, right now, you know? I said, no, how can they be happy? I'm not happy, you know? I had seen my great-grandmother's picture, you know, and saw the state she was living in. I understood that concretely. So that's, that was the beginning of my radicalization. So I must add, I'm a Vietnam veteran. No, there's nothing to clap about. Pardon? I always think about my survival every damn day. You're right. I understand you. Thank you. Well, I'll clap for that. You know, and I had schoolmates who went there and never came back. So, yes. So I'm a former auto worker, steel worker, construction worker. I'm even the first ex-convict to be hired as a corrections officer in the state of Michigan. You're looking at him. I was the first one fired too, because I couldn't get with the regiment, you know. And plus the fact a lot of people that were in prison were friends of mine. So it was a difficult situation to negotiate. I mean, not for me, because they knew who I was and what I represented, but for some other people, mainly the other guards, it's another story. So, you know, we're faced with great challenges as a life force. Are there any mathematicians in the room? Okay. Did anybody did anybody pass mathematics in grade school? You know, I'm an aspiring comedian too, so yeah, you left yourself open for that. No. Can anybody tell me the formula for speed? Hey, well. You know, if you ask somebody how fast they're driving, oh, I'm going 40 miles an hour. So 40 miles, you know, distance is, or speed is distance over time, as the gentleman said, 40 miles an hour. You know the formula. Now, what does it have to do with this discussion? Plenty. Because we must recognize where we are, what space we occupy. There's so much to learn from from the internet. One guy gave us a speech on the internet, a black man. He was lecturing some young black people. He said, well, there's a lot to learn. You can talk with people in China. Well, that's halfway across the world, you know? And it's a deep and rich civilization with a rich history, you know, and great accomplishments, you know? And so it pays to know where you are and know how you traverse the universe. So I was thinking about that formula today, and I was twisting it around, trying to fit it into different corners. And I thought I had one of those moments. But as is the case with me, I have a thought and I should write it down, but I didn't write it down. So if you have aha moments, write them down and share them with us. So, as I said, I am a Vietnam veteran, and yes, I can tell horror stories, and I also can still tell stories of beauty, because war can perhaps bring out the best and the worst in people. And I've experienced it from all sides. In fact, I was stationed with the 335th Transportation Company, Air Direct Support, which was a helicopter company. I had never been in a helicopter in my life until I went to Vietnam. And incidentally, there was a very famous person who survived a crash in one of our helicopters. It was Colin Powell. I can share this information with you. I don't give a damn who knows it. I was new in the company, and you always hear things. People are talking this. Where can you get your weed? Where can you get a silk night coat? All kind of things. Sandals or whatever you needed. And so somebody was talking about, yeah, man, the general's helicopter crashed. But I got the instinct impression that it wasn't an accident. And years later, I learned that Colin Powell was on that helicopter. And interestingly enough, is anybody here familiar with My Lai? Okay. My Lai was an incident where the United States military went on what they call a search and destroy mission, and they killed 400 civilians in cold blood. Just shot them down. Babies, women, men, it didn't make a difference. Of course, they raped women, the whole 9 yards. You know the drill. And, oh yeah. So Colin Powell was designated to investigate. Well, he whitewashed the incident, and that's how he made his way to success, by whitewashing to the My Lai massacre. You've got it from me, There was a lot of resistance in the United States military. There's a joke. There's a joke. A comedian used to tell. The general was standing somewhere observing the troops, and he saw a soldier run by. He says, "Soldier, stop! Why are you, running?" And the soldier looked at him and said, "Because I can't fly." Oh well, not my joke.
Thank you, Daniel. I
Okay.
think we're honored for you to grace this occasion. We wish we would have a lot more time with you in terms of your memories, but thanks very much for what you've contributed to this historic event. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's all for this session.
You have a break.
Yeah. I think we will need to. Are there any immediate questions? Because I just think that you've had a number of speakers, and it'd be good, to take one or two questions, if there are. If not, then we break. Any questions to any of them, particularly those who are here?
Yeah, thank you so much for organizing all this. I'm learning a lot. And I have a question for Tobias, because you were mentioning the ancestors that were like your ancestors, the German ancestors that were resisting the whole colonial project. And you said that we want to continue this conference in the spirit of these ancestors. And I'm wondering if it's even possible to separate these honorable ancestors that were opposing colonialism and everything that came with it, all the violence, separating that from also the responsibility that as a descendant of German people, of people who organized the Berlin Conference, the Congo Conference, can you really separate it also from the responsibility that it brings in terms of accountability that, of course, still hasn't happened?
Okay, any other question we want to take, any other question? There's one for Tobias, and yeah.
It's not thanks again for the organization of this really interesting event. It's a question that I've had for some time when it comes to reparations, when it comes to like Britain, to France, Netherlands, whatever. It's really clear, like reparations for African states, especially for particular groups of people. I'm wondering, like, for the experts in this topic here, how should reparations be asked for in the future? So, for example, in terms of, should Senegal get a lot more than Kenya, given that like there were more people kidnapped in Senegal, for example, that there were in Kenya? And then I'm personally from Colombia. In a country like Colombia, where like there's like about, I don't know, 10 million people who are descendants of Africans in one way or another. I am in a certain way one. How should it work out? Like, who should be actually in charge of the reparations in these kinds of cases? In cases like Brazil, for example, like the United States is really obvious, like drastically involved in slavery and like completely apartheid societies in a lot of ways. But in states where there has been like a lot more mixing, how should the reparations take place? Like, should the Colombian government be involved with it? Of course, but then also, should the Colombian government get more from Spain, this kind of stuff? I don't know, like, I just want to know, like, how does it work?
We get the drift. Actually, on your question, I would say wait till the next session when the answers will begin to flow for some of the contributions that I've made to it. But just briefly, Tobias, if you can respond, then we go for the break.
Thank you so much for the question. I think you can't separate it. I think we bear the full responsibility of what our ancestors did and the genocides that they committed, and we can never run away from that. That's, for me, the absolute baseline. Whatever that means in full reparations in planet repairs is something that we need to do in collaboration with the people of African heritage and from the continent that we're working with. So it is absolutely not separable. And I'm really grateful that you pointed out to not there be any misunderstanding. The question is what that means for us today, now. And I think the problem often with Germans is that they hide in their guilt. And like there's a lot of shame and there's a lot of, well, but and it's like kind of the whole country, but it's everybody. And what I take from that, and this is this thinking also about ancestors very much comes from people like Kofi and Esther and others, is to not be kind of pushed into inaction by the horrible ancestry that we have, different people of us have, that certainly we as Germans have, but to use that also to choose the people of resistance that always have been there and also reclaim their histories in our struggle in solidarity and make that our commitment for our life, as it was the commitment of some of those peoples. it never can be erased. The guilt is yeah.
That's not the right direction. I was just saying that I don't think that the guilt can be erased or denied. That would be the same as Elon Musk was saying to Alice Weidel just recently, and he was saying that the Germans should forget about their guilt. And I think the guilt is, yeah, I mean, you're saying that it leads to inaction, but I think you can also like use it in a different way. But you can
Well,
not deny
I think,
it.
yeah, let's continue after the break, because it's a continuing theme. I mean, for me, I'm very, very clear about it, right? That there are many, many, many Africans who also feel a sense of shame and guilt for what some of our people, did in this process. Treachery, betrayal, cowardice is not an exclusive thing to just Europeans. Africans, we have a lot of that, and a lot of that explains our current situation. Because if we were brave enough, if we took our responsibilities far more seriously, Africa would today not be what it is. So, we have an African prophet that says, when your one finger is pointing to somebody else, all the rest are pointing to you. And this is what it is. Now, I want to say here that for me, those German communists, and I want to say it very clearly, they were communists, right? They opted out of capitalism. They opted out of imperialism. They stood against the beast of capitalism and imperialism right here and paid very dearly for it. And I want to see how many Africans are brave enough to know those histories and stand with them as they stood and died for, in solidarity with us. This is the challenge. So, this is what this conference is about. This is what this EPRDIF is precisely about. How do we, again, create the space where African, the best of the daughters and sons of Africa can stand on the same side of the barricades with the best of the daughters and sons of Europe and across the world. And when we come to examine what true reparatory justice is, in no less than the concepts advanced long ago by Frantz Fanon, right, who at one point opposed reparations for very good reason, and at another point actually championed it, will see that reparations is not really about bags of money, being paid, being exacted from one group of people, for another. The real challenge of reparations, as Fanon put it very, very beautifully, is whether we are prepared to take our freedom. Because freedom is the best embodiment of reparatory justice. And we as African people, the vast majority of humanity, the wretched of the earth, as Fanon put it, need that more than anything else. Thank you.
We will have a short break of about 10 minutes. At 6:30, there will be dinner in the, 8:30. There will be dinner in the auditorium. So let's go quickly also into the next session, but take the well-deserved break and see you in a bit.
Yeah, let me begin with a quote from Frantz Fanon in The Wretched of the Earth in 1961, where he writes, "Colonialism and imperialism have not settled their debt to us once they have withdrawn from our territories. The wealth of the imperialist nations is also our wealth. Europe is literally the creation of the third world." Now, this I think is an eloquent uh, explanation, elucidation of the logic underlying demands for reparations. Now, there was an article written in the New Statesman in 2024 that came out with a left case against slavery reparations, which I think was an interesting article, should be read, if not accepted in its conclusions. But it does note that pro reparations campaigners can point to precedents of that a larger reparations program could follow. In 2021, Germany officially recognized and apologized for the genocides committed against the Herero and Nama peoples and agreed to pay $1.3 billion to the Namibian state through existing aid programs, though it was worded delicately to avoid the word reparations. And Britain itself has officially apologized and given reparations to the Kenyans it tortured during the Mau Mau revolt in the 1950s. If apology and compensation was possible in these cases, then why not for Atlantic slavery and colonialism? Now, there are cases of people on the left who have come out against reparations, and among them the young Frantz Fanon. So, in contrast to the first quote that I give of Frantz Fanon from The Wretched of the Earth in 1961 and 1954, in Black Skin, White Mask, he writes in the conclusion, "I have neither the right nor the duty to claim reparations for the domestication of my ancestors. Am I going to ask the contemporary white man to answer for the slave ships of the 17th century? I do not have the right to be mired in what the past has determined. I am not the slave to the slavery that dehumanized my ancestors. There is no Negro mission. There is no white burden. I, as a man of color, want only this, that the enslavement of man by man cease forever." Now, Fanon and other Black radicals like C.L.R. James and Kwame Nkrumah, they tell us in this article, were against reparations because they still reflect the relationship of paternalism and dependency that defined the colonial relationship. But more crucially, they enchain Black people to the scars of the past, where their identity and subjectivity must forever be determined by slavery and colonialism with no hope of transcending it. Against this historical determinism, they put their faith in freedom and the exciting undetermined possibilities of the future. So this idea of the future and freedom as opposed to the past and dependency. So as we can see, Fanon had contradictory things to say about reparations. At the end of Black Skin, White Mask, he rejects them on the grounds that it mires subjectivity in the past. But in The Wretched of the Earth, by contrast, he speaks of the debt owed by the colonizers to the colonized. In Fanon's ambivalence, we can observe some of the basic contradictions of the reparations phenomenon. Now, the imprisoned Kurdish leader Abdullah Öcalan seems unaware of the debate about reparations. Nevertheless, it is possible to apply democratic and federalist principles to articulate an Öcalanist position on reparations. For starters, Öcalan is skeptical of financial fixes for problems of disempowerment. Instead, he argues for the urgency of people power and against the usurpations of popular sovereignty by elites in the state. As Piketty has documented, financial wealth does tend to accumulate in the hands of the wealthy. Öcalan is opposed to statist solutions to social problems. He is a libertarian socialist, distrustful of the state, and Öcalan's perspective would urge us to treat with suspicion the role of state elites in many reparation schemes. More fundamentally, Öcalan believes that the opposite of colonization is freedom, and that therefore the truly decolonizing move is to construct institutions of popular people's power. Reparations can be part of this broader program by linking reparations to the economic liberation of a core of full-time cadres committed to forging people power. For example, to the extent that reparations can go to the class who Fanon called the wretched of the earth, they would seem most certainly progressive. But to the extent that they favor formerly colonized elites, their progressiveness is somehow more questionable. But the case of the so-called colonial emergency against the Mau Mau in Kenya is a particularly salient case in point. In 2013, the British government agreed to pay some £20 million to victims of torture from the emergency. This is a concrete case with tort compensation for specific victims. It is a bit different from reparations for colonialism in general because they are not as specific of victims nor as specific of crimes, or rather they are specific enough, the evils of colonialism, but not necessarily reducible to specific individuals. In addition, the Western legal model's individualistic focus is ill-equipped to recognize and remedy systemic injustice, as an article has recently put it, such as slavery, genocide, colonial exploitation, and decades of austerity imposed under the auspices of the IMF and the World Bank. The subject of reparations for colonialism is, of course, intimately related to debates surrounding the slave trade. It was for Walter Rodney the combined effect of the slave trade with later colonialism through which Europe underdeveloped Africa. The Berlin Conference presents a historical occasion in which the crimes of colonialism in Africa were plasmated and rendered concrete. To call colonialism a crime is to suggest both that there are perpetrators who can be held accountable and victims who can be compensated for what was done. People were driven from their ancestral lands. People were forced to work for European cash. People were tortured and massacred when they rebelled. All these are criminal actions in relation to the regime of universal human rights. But then there's the somehow less tangible denial of self-determination which was involved. When I asked a Kurdish friend with close ties to the Kurdish freedom movement what he thought about reparations, he replied, "They're helpful but reformist." The connotations of the word reformist, at least as used here, are certainly negative, almost reminiscent of the use Rosa Luxemburg made of it in the title of her book, Revolution or Reform, but not quite, since he admits that they are nevertheless useful. What does it mean to call reparations useful? It could refer to their symbolic significance in relation to the dialectic of recognition which Charles Taylor, following Hegel, made so famous a few decades ago. It could be more material, as in expanding the material resources and opportunities of those populations who have been subject to colonialism, though here questions of distributive mechanisms arise. The crimes of colonialism are many and most heinous and grave indeed. Reparations are most certainly in order. Of what kind and to whom? The answers to these questions are bound to be contentious. I would argue in the spirit of the imprisoned Kurdish leader Abdullah Öcalan that ultimately the repair most fundamentally needed involves the restructuring of the very fabric of society along radical democratic, indeed democratic and federal lines. But before I sketch the logic of this Öcalanist line, let me first adumbrate the argument in favor of reparations. Here the work of Walter Rodney, in particular his classic book, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, sets the parameters for the subsequent discussion. In that book, Rodney persuasively makes the case that the combination of the slave trade and colonialism devastated the continent of Africa. Others have made the converse argument that Africa effectively developed Europe. There is a historic debt which has been forged, and the neo-colonial situation in which African states are immersed and enmeshed only reinforced the plunder of the continent. This latter point was first and perhaps best articulated by Nkrumah after he had been dislodged from power via coup. The depictions of Rodney and Nkrumah both converge around a diagnosis that colonialism and neo-colonialism are to blame for the plight of contemporary Africa. Fanon, too, has a scathing account of the evils of colonialism and a far-sighted prediction about the vices of the national bourgeoisie. Sankara puts his finger on the pulse of finance to diagnose where the neo-colonial noose could be found. The plunder of resources and finances from the African continent continues apace in the 21st century. How to repair this situation? A democratic and federal solution would seem required. Thank you very much.
Germany is doing right now. Are we ready for that? Hello. Hello. Let's go on. Hello?
Hello, we can hear you.
No.
Hi. Welcome. Can you hear us? We can hear you if you can hear us. Please
Hello?
introduce yourselves. Hi.
Okay, it's very difficult. No, unless you. Hello? Hello?
Oh,
Okay. Hello? Hello?
can you hear us?
Hello, hi. Okay, I think that we are ready now. Okay? Hello?
Okay.
Okay. Can we start? Hi, everyone. Hi. So, hello.
Hello, please proceed.
Okay, now, can you hear us now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Excuse, our connection was very bad. And we have to change. Okay. Hello. And remember, perhaps. Hello.
Hello, we can hear you.
Okay, yes, now we can hear you. Okay. Okay, so hi everyone. So we are to Ouagadougou and we welcome everyone here at the Berlin Conference. So we are at the Paris Center for the meeting to ask reparation for Africa and all of the nation who are suffering from the colonialism. So we are at Kambwese and Mali liaison and Burkina as me and Niger are here too. We received some orders, leaders of organization, and they are greeting you too. So tomorrow shall be the conference, the great one, but today was just the opening of Berlin Conference and also in Burkina Faso and the opening of Paris Center. So we want to welcome you. And our connection today is very bad. So this is why we separate to join you.
Yes, I am Hussein Tahiru from Niger. I'm Umar Kramho Jara from Mali.
Okay, thank you very much, everyone. Thank you very much. Excuse us for the connection. The network is very bad today. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. La patrie pour la mort nous vaincra. Merci.
Okay, thanks. Thank you. Okay. These are some of the challenges we've had to go through to ensure that this gathering in Berlin, Germany, for at least involves our African people and other progressive forces, across the world, have the technological possibilities to do that now. So, for you to see a gathering of people in Ghana in terms of pouring libation for this to start. And now some of our colleagues who are gathered in Burkina Faso, which is working as part of the Alliance of Sahel States to undo the harm. And it's, these governments are winning the hearts and minds of lots of our African people across the world, moving in, trying to move things the correct direction. But, people are looking at these governments and not looking at the grassroots forces of resistance that in the first place created the possibilities for them to come and have been maintaining them and ever since. And we wanted you to hear some of them. So hopefully tomorrow, with better connections, you hear more from them and know what is really happening. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Kofi. And thanks everyone. Today in our country, the network is very bad. But accepted that things all are very fine. And we are ready for the conference of tomorrow. And as you know, right now is the West African Cinematographic Film Festival, FESPACO, and many countries used to participate here. And as liaison of Paris, we made it many people there. The Caribbean people, Ghana people, Chad people, Cameroonian, Egyptian, and we are in connection. And some would like to discover more about Paris and the vision of Paris. And we say that we will connect them with a big team, a great team in London and also in all of the world. So we went together, and you can see some pictures in the team about our program here. Thank you very much and for what you make for Mali people to fly to come to Burkina Faso and Niger liaison too. We are at the center. We are on night too. You know that Africa reality is very different than there. There was many people here, but all of them was very thankful. Thank you very much, Mr. Kofi. And we hope that we will finish in joy and we will win for the fighting for our freedom. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, they are speaking from where the hottest front lines of our Pan-African struggle for emancipation to undo the crimes of Berlin, 1884, happening right now. Anyway, let's move on. Yeah, we are also very, very glad to receive a message from one of the most inspiring, figures to have emerged from indigenous communities of resistance against, colonization. Senator Lydia Thorpe in Australia, who represents the Aboriginal First Peoples in the Senate in Australia and fights from there against the colonialism as represented particularly by the British Crown and also the rest of the forces of imperialism that bolster up what the British coloniality represents today. So let's hear Senator Lydia Thorpe.
Hello everyone, I am Lydia Thorpe. I'm a Gunai Gunij Maran Djaparang woman first and foremost, but I'm also a senator in the colonial government of what is now called Australia, or what they call Australia. I want to thank the Secretariat for the invitation to speak to you today. This is an incredible event and something that we need to replicate around the world to garner international solidarity and support to continue the resistance against the colonies right around the world, but also to stand up against the many injustices First Peoples around the globe continue to face. I come from a strong line of matriarchs who have fought the colony all of their lives, and I know no different. I've been raised to be strong, to be outspoken, and to resist the colony in all its forms. So, you know, we face in this country every day a most sophisticated genocide where they're not coming with an army and guns. They're doing it silently. They're doing it in a way where they take 24,000 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander children from their families and give them to other people, predominantly white people. That is an act of genocide. They continue to cause harm against our people on every level. That is an act of genocide. They rape and pillage our country, our water, our song lines. That is an act of genocide. They continue to incarcerate our people and kill our people in custody, and those numbers are on the rise. That is an act of genocide. So the sophistication of the genocide in what they call Australia is very real, and our people are fighting, continue to fight and resist after over 200 years of colonisation. We are very strong people, very proud people, and we will continue to take on the colony and march in the streets and call out the king for being the colonizer that he is, and the person who should be held accountable for receiving stolen goods. I mean, you know, in any other court in any country, if you are caught stealing, then you get into trouble by the law. Now we have a colonizing king who stole so much, who gets to sit in his throne and look down on people like us. So we have an obligation to our old people to resist the colony in all its forms and to seek reparations so that we do not suffer the consequences of genocide or colonization in the way that we have. We need to self-determine our own destinies. It is us who knows what is best for us. We need to look at peace treaties. You know, we want a peace treaty in this country, sovereign to sovereign. If the colonizing king says he's sovereign of our lands, well, let's talk about that, because we've never ceded our sovereignty and we will never cede our sovereignty. So a treaty has to be between sovereigns, and it could potentially be about sharing sovereignty. But until we have that conversation and that negotiation, there is an ongoing war that has been declared on my people over 200 years ago. The only war that happened on these shores was, the first war on these shores was against my people. We need to look at the world's oldest continuing living culture on the planet, and we need to embrace that, acknowledge that, respect that. But we live in a colony here that denies our rights to country, to water, to our law, to our language. And that's why we're rising up, and that's why international solidarity is so important right now. We see what's going on around the world. We see the ongoing real-life genocide of Palestinians. We see the Kanaki mob struggling to maintain their survival against a violent regime. We see West Papua. These genocides are happening today and every day, and we need to come together, brothers and sisters around the world, and work to eradicate this violence. And the only way we're going to do that is to come together. So I'm making it my business to connect internationally, and that's why this conference that you're holding is so important as part of that work. And once we are united globally, we will be a force to be reckoned with. And I stand with you all each and every day. I'll continue to call out the colonizer here because he's not my king. It's not his land, and we want what they stole back. Thank you very much. Enjoy the rest of your conference, and I hope that we can stay connected, because that's what it's about. We have a responsibility. Thank you very much.
We are very, very happy to have another speaker from Berlin. From Neukölln, Ferhat Kocak is like one of the most important voices at the moment for anti-racist and anti-colonial struggles, and a face for Neukölln. And we're really, really happy to have you here. He just got elected into parliament, and we're very happy about you.
Liebe Freundinnen und Freunde, vielen Dank für die Einladung, dass ich heute hier sprechen darf. Ich hatte gedacht, ich muss heute das erste Mal in meinem Leben auf Englisch sprechen, habe die ganze Zeit geübt, die einzelnen Wörter, die ich immer wieder falsch ausgesprochen habe, und dann habe ich hier vor der Tür gemerkt, okay, ich darf das doch auf Deutsch, jetzt habe ich das Deutsche rausgeholt, damit ich bloß keine Wörter dann falsch sage und dann was anderes dabei rauskommt. Ich möchte meinen kurzen Input mit meinem eigenen Bezirk Neukölln beginnen, denn auch hier finden sich die Spuren der deutschen Kolonialgeschichte. Ebenso wie an vielen anderen Orten Berlins ist außerdem auch hier exemplarisch, wie schleppend die Aufarbeitung der Verbrechen des deutschen Kolonialismus verlaufen ist. Nicht mal 2 Kilometer in diese Richtung von hier befindet sich die Lucy-Lameck-Straße, benannt nach der tansanischen Unabhängigkeitskämpferin. Bis 2020 war diese Straße wie selbstverständlich nach dem Kolonialverbrecher Hermann von Wissmann benannt. Dieses kleine symbolische Kapitel der Aufarbeitung ist gerade mal knapp 5 Jahre her. Diese kleinen Kämpfe sind aus meiner Sicht trotzdem wertvoll, denn sie durchbrechen die Normalisierung und Banalisierung der deutschen Kolonialverbrechen. Wir reden bei von Wissmann nicht von irgendwem, sondern einem hochrangigen Militär und Kolonialgouverneur, der selbst von Zeitgenossen als extrem brutal geschildert wurde und für zahlreiche Morde verantwortlich ist. Doch dieser gesamte Prozess, um diese Straße umzubenennen, hat ewig gedauert. Und schuld daran ist nicht nur die ganz komplizierte und lang andauernde Bürokratie in Deutschland. Nicht mal 3 Kilometer von hier ist Rixdorf, der malerische, historische Ortskern und die evangelische Brüdergemeinde. Mitglieder dieser Gemeinde waren in der deutschen Kolonialzeit an der teilweise gewaltsamen und zwangsweisen christlichen Missionierung im sogenannten Deutsch-Ostafrika beteiligt. Und dann haben wir hier auch noch auf dem Kolumbiadamm den sogenannten Herero-Stein, wo die Kolonialverbrecher geehrt werden. What the fuck? Deutschland hat einfach aus der eigenen Kolonialgeschichte nichts gelernt. Ich will mit diesen Beispielen deutlich machen, dass man in Deutschland geografisch nicht weit gehen muss, um über die Kolonialgeschichte zu stolpern, denn sie ist überall. Die entscheidenden Fragen ist aber, warum stolpert man darüber? Warum sind diese historischen Verbrechen immer noch so unsichtbar und werden häufig nur durch Initiativen von unten sichtbar gemacht? Es ist nicht so, dass die Verbrechen des deutschen Kolonialismus nicht bekannt wären. Ich möchte an dieser Stelle an Rosa Luxemburg erinnern, die in vielen zeitgenössischen Werken der vermeintlich zivilisierten Welt den Spiegel vorhielt. 1913 schrieb sie in Die Krise der Sozialdemokratie: Die vermeintlich zivilisierte Welt schaut gelassen und tatenlos zu, während derselbe Imperialismus Zehntausende Hereros dem grausigsten Untergang weihte. Gut, es ist vielleicht keine Überraschung, dass Deutschland niemals auf Sozialistinnen hörte. Aber ich lasse die Ausrede nicht gelten, dass die Verbrechen erst nach und nach ans Licht kommen. Es ist eine Relativierung, wenn behauptet wird, dass damals andere Verhältnisse geherrscht haben. Menschen wie Luxemburg haben auch damals schon klar benannt, um was es sich handelte: um Terror. Zurück nach Neukölln und Berlin, weil ich auch darum gebeten wurde, über antirassistische Kämpfe hier zu sprechen. Das, was mir hier im Bezirk als erstes in den Sinn kam, war der jahrelange Kampf um die Aufklärung und Anerkennung des rechten Terrors hier in Neukölln. Seit fast 10 Jahren ereignen sich im Bezirk tätliche Angriffe, rechte Schmierereien, Brandanschläge, wie beispielsweise auf meine Familie und mich, das wir nur durch viel Glück überlebt haben, und andere Antifaschistinnen, bis hin zu den Morden an Luke Holland und Burak Bektaş. In Neukölln mussten wir über Jahre hinweg dafür kämpfen, dass das Berliner Parlament überhaupt einmal einen Untersuchungsausschuss einsetzt. Die Muster gleichen sich bei diesen Debatten. Im besten Fall haben wir die Einzeltäterthese, im schlimmsten Fall die Täter-Opfer-Umkehr, wie zum Beispiel in Hanau oder bei den NSU-Morden, die von der rechten Springerpresse als Dönermorde bezeichnet wurden. Wie bei antikolonialen Kämpfen mussten auch wir viele Jahre darum kämpfen, dass überhaupt Zusammenhänge hergestellt werden. Die Erzählung von Einzeltätern oder isolierten Straftaten ist sehr typisch für Deutschland. Aus Sicht des Staates ist das logisch, denn wenn man systematische Zusammenhänge herstellen würde, dann müsste man sich ja auch tatsächlich kritisch mit den eigenen Sicherheitsbehörden, mit dem systematischen Rassismus und in letzter Konsequenz mit dem eigenen Gesellschaftssystem auseinandersetzen. Und das ist eben ein Gesellschaftssystem, das seine Kraft aus Spaltung und Ausbeutung zieht. Und hier kommen der Kampf gegen rechten Terror und der Kampf gegen das koloniale Erbe zusammen. Denn auch hier wird so getan, als seien koloniale Verbrechen ein isoliertes Ereignis von schlechten Politikern in der Vergangenheit. Zuzugeben, dass es hier eine systematische Kontinuität gibt, hieße zuzugeben, dass das grundlegende System dahinter immer noch dasselbe ist. Es hieße zuzugeben, dass die kapitalistische Wirtschaftsweise weiterhin auch auf der Ausbeutung der Arbeitskraft und der Ausbeutung der natürlichen Ressourcen des globalen Südens beruht. Ich denke, das tatsächliche Problem ist erstens, dass die deutsche Erinnerungskultur sehr symbolhaft ist und sich nicht mit tatsächlicher Entschädigung beschäftigen will. Bis heute wurden keine direkten Reparationszahlungen an die Herero und Nama in Namibia gezahlt. Sinti und Roma, die im Holocaust ermordet wurden, 500.000 waren es, werden heute abgeschoben nach Moldau. Zweitens ist es in einer Zeit, in der Deutschland offensichtlich einen Genozid in Gaza unter anderem mit Waffenlieferungen unterstützt, politisch schwer zu legitimieren, wenn historisch Genozide anerkannt werden. Ich glaube, die Forderungen müssen klar sein und ich schließe mich da den Forderungen auch meiner eigenen Partei an. Eine offizielle Anerkennung des Völkermords an den Herero und Nama beispielsweise im heutigen reicht nicht aus. Direkte Entschädigungszahlungen an die Nachfahren der Opfer ist entscheidend. Es braucht aber eine echte Einbeziehung der Betroffenen in den Dialog, bei der die Deutungshoheit auch bei den Betroffenen liegt. Und da kommen wir auch zu einem Punkt. Wir haben auch hier, wenn es rechten Terror gibt, nie die Deutungshoheit bei den Betroffenen, sondern immer bei den Sicherheitsbehörden und bei den Politikern. Und deshalb kämpfen wir auch immer an der Seite der Betroffenen. Einen Punkt habe ich noch, den ich mir jetzt hier ergänzt habe, was mir, während ich das mir durchgelesen habe, eingefallen ist. Deutschland hat sich beispielsweise auch nie damit beschäftigt, was ihre Verantwortung war beim Genozid in Ruanda. Klar ist auch, dass es eine genaue Sichtung und umfassende Rückgabe von gestohlenen Kulturgütern braucht, sowie antirassistische und dekoloniale Bildungsarbeit. Klar definiert in Bildungsplänen. Und da komme ich gleich auch wieder zum Thema Gaza hier in Neukölln. Wenn wir in den Schulen das nicht thematisieren, wenn das nicht ein Teil des Lehrplans hier in Neukölln ist, wo die größte palästinensische Community in Europa lebt, wie sollen dann die anderen Kinder verstehen, was in den Köpfen meines Freundes, meiner Freundinnen abgeht in dieser Situation? Dasselbe gilt auch für das Themenfeld Türkei und Kurdistan. Wenn wir nicht darüber in den Schulen reden, wie sollen diese Jungs, Kids, Mädchen miteinander irgendwie connecten und zusammenkommen, wenn sie gar nicht verstehen, was die Lebensrealität ist, was diese Kinder zu Hause erleben, im Fernsehen sehen und dann mit in die Schule bringen. Und gleichzeitig, was macht der Staat? Wenn es Proteste gibt, gibt es Repression. Und der Jugendhilfeausschuss in Neukölln hat einen Brandbrief verfasst. Die Bezirksverordnetenversammlung hat das zum Glück auch beschlossen. Aber im Brandbrief steht, dass Jugendliche in Jugendclubs traumatisiert sind, immer wieder. Und das liegt daran, dass sie entweder selber Gewalt erleben auf diesen Protesten oder sehen, wie ihre Familie durch die Polizei Gewalt erlebt. Und gleichzeitig sehen sie die Bilder von Gaza, wo ihre Familien ermordet werden. Ich denke, es ist klar, dass wir die öffentliche Debatte nicht dem deutschen Parlament überlassen dürfen und auch, wenn es mal eine öffentliche Debatte gibt, nicht zu verdanken haben, sondern einem gewaltigen Druck von unten. Diese Feststellung ist mir in vielen Fällen wichtig. Wir sollten die Möglichkeiten, die uns beispielsweise durch solidarische Abgeordnete im Parlament halt auch gegeben werden, zum Beispiel durch Anfragen oder auch durch Anträge, um diese Debatten auch ins Parlament zu tragen von den Straßen, nutzen, aber uns klar darüber sein, dass wir uns bei der antirassistischen und dekolonialen Arbeit nicht auf den Staat verlassen dürfen, der kein ehrliches oder gar humanistisches Interesse an Aufklärung hat. Das beginnt bei Umbenennungen von Straßen und Plätzen, die einfach ewig dauern und mündet in direkten Entschädigungen der betroffenen Communities. Deshalb ist es wichtig, dass wir immer wieder zusammenkommen, uns zusammenschließen, unterschiedliche Kämpfe, sei es Kämpfe in Bezug auf Kurdistan, auf Palästina, antirassistische Kämpfe hier, antifaschistische Kämpfe und uns gemeinsam organisieren. Denn dabei können wir wirklich den Druck auf die Politik erhöhen, aber vor allem auch dadurch Veränderungen erzwingen und mehr Sichtbarkeit für unsere antirassistische und dekoloniale Kämpfe weltweit schaffen. In dem Sinne, hoch die internationale Solidarität.
Vielen Dank. Dankeschön. Thank you very much. Do we have one last message from the room or on the screen? Right. Ah.
Hi, everyone. Good evening, and I hope you're having a really good conference so far. It's a very, very important conference on reparations, and it's fantastic that you've done this conference to mark 140 years since the Berlin carve-up of Africa by the European states, and I'm very pleased to be part of this. I wish I could be there. Very difficult to do these kinds of talks to a screen, not knowing how you're reacting. But I've got a few reflections on reparations that I'd like to put forward and see what you think about it. I'd like to start with the CARICOM 10-point action plan. So the CARICOM 10-point action plan, I'm sure many of you will be fully aware of this, came out of the CARICOM Reparations Commission, which was set up in 2013 by Caribbean heads of government. And the idea of that was to, really make the case for reparations for Caribbean, regional, indigenous and African descendants who were and are victims of genocide, of enslavement, slave trading, and racial apartheid. So the 10-point action plan is a very interesting point of departure. I know it's not the only point of departure in this debate. There have been many ideas around reparations before. I know it's coming from CARICOM, so it's not necessarily coming from the wider reparations movement. But it still nevertheless provides an interesting framework to engage with and have a dialogue with. So the 10-point action plan from CARICOM is as follows, and I just want to briefly summarize that for those who aren't aware. So the first principle is the idea that European states make a full and formal apology and accept responsibility for all of the harms of colonialism and enslavement, and commit to repair the harm. So it's a very important first principle that they acknowledge their responsibility. And as we know, this is proving very difficult. We know there's a song, sorry seems like the hardest word to say, Elton John, and it's very, very difficult for European leaders. And it doesn't matter what era and what generation they're in. And it's not because maybe they don't want to say sorry, it's because they know the political and legal ramifications of acknowledging their wrongdoing. But it's the most important principle, I think, and it's very important that it's first. After that, there are 9 other points in the action plan. They're quite similar. The second point is around the idea of Indigenous peoples' development programs to support European states to support communities that are Indigenous communities that have been almost wiped out by colonialism, to support them to be regenerated. The third principle is the idea that European states would help to fund the repatriation of those who wish to return to Africa, and also to address any issues such as citizenship and integration. The fourth principle is the creation of cultural institutions and the return of cultural heritage, again to address the colonial destruction of indigenous cultures, of languages, of historical memory, which was deliberate and is an important part of reparation, is to acknowledge and repair all of that loss. The fifth principle is to assist in addressing the huge public health crises that exist in the Caribbean, but also elsewhere, that are a direct result of hundreds of years of colonization and enslavement. We're talking about physical and emotional health issues and stress that has passed down over generations. The way in which indigenous food cultures were removed, taken away, and imposition of sometimes sugar-based diets that have led to type 2 diabetes and other very poor health issues. These things need to be addressed. So there's a very important principle of acknowledging the health impact of colonialism. Principle 6 responds to the idea that there needs to be educational projects and educational programs to address the fact that the colonial powers systematically denied educational advancement to indigenous peoples. And then at the end of the formal end of colonialism, obviously education has been structurally racist. It's been riven with class inequalities, and it has been designed to continue to support and reproduce the colonial, neo-colonial relations of power. Seventh principle is about cultural and historical knowledge exchanges. So effectively creating intercultural knowledge exchange to also to recognize the idea that indigenous peoples need to be recognized and also need to recover history and culture that has been destroyed. And this is an important part of the rest of the world, the colonizing world, to also recognize and acknowledge that historical and cultural knowledge. The eighth principle is about psychological rehabilitation, which is linked to the public health issue around the transmission of trauma through generations. The ninth principle is about the right to development through the use of technology that systematically was denied, technology and science being systematically denied by the colonial powers, so that colonized peoples, colonized spaces would be dependent on the imperial powers. And finally, and always probably the most controversial, is around the idea of debt cancellation, but also, of course, monetary financial compensation, the kind of narrow version of reparations to address historic and ongoing financial burdens that have been imposed from colonialism and from enslavement. So the 10-point action plan is an important starting point for these kinds of discussions. And, you know, there's nothing in the 10-point plan that seems should be rejected. Obviously, it's a dialogue, it's a process of discussion and debate, right? But I do think, having thought about the CARICOM 10-point plan, and it is a very important plan to engage with, that there are two fundamental limitations that you in Berlin might want to consider or may even be considering. The first limitation is the lack of a clear acknowledgement or a clear sense that colonial destruction and thus reparations are inherently spatial and need to be spatialized. Now, I'm not using these terms in a sort of academic-y way to trick anyone, but what I'm meaning by spatial is that colonization was an inherently spatial, physical, geographical process. So if we want to really understand what reparation means, then we really need to also understand what colonial destruction means. And we need to do that in terms of the scale of that process. So I mean that we should be demanding to find out, not just to be told, but to also find out for ourselves the actual geography, the real geography of colonial land and resource grabs, the true scale of ecological destruction and disrepair, the true extent of enslavement and the destruction of indigenous peoples, their knowledges, their ways of living, their cultures, their languages, the true scale of the land that has been stolen, all of the wealth that was generated, trying to understand who benefited, what benefited, like both individuals, institutions, corporations, and where have the proceeds, where has the power, where has the wealth gone? Not necessarily disappeared, but where has it flowed to? How do we track it and trace it over time? This seems to be missing a little bit in the 10-point action plan. It's quite vague. And actually, I think part of reparations is to be really clear about what is to be repaired. And I know that there's a lot of work that is going on in this area. I know there's a lot of projects that look at different aspects of colonial legacies, colonial destruction, wealth, the corporate power that emerged out of colonialism, trying to put some kind of financial values on who profited from the so-called slave trade and so on. It feels to me like all of this work is fragmented, that it's piecemeal, that sometimes it's driven by academic interests, sometimes it's driven by ad hoc activist projects, sometimes it's even driven by this decolonization stuff that's going on, where institutions that are actually responsible for some of this suddenly discover that maybe they should talk a little bit more about their own role. And it's also part of the fact that they are cleaning up their image, which is obviously then come under some kind of contestation. So we need a serious international joined up project that will really map and detail and do proper research, activists and scholars working together to seriously understand the spatial nature of colonial destruction. The second element to this is that if we just make these demands on European states, we're going to miss the corporations, the institutions, and the individuals that benefited and are still benefiting from all of the resources and land and people that were stolen. To what I think is the second major limitation of the CARICOM 10-point plan is its constrained understanding of colonization and enslavement for when we're talking about repair. It feels like the 10-point action plan is referring to a point in time and a place in time. But at what point in time and on which map do we draw the line between colonialism and what comes after colonialism? How do we separate colonialism from neocolonialism? And how do we separate colonialism, neocolonialism from capitalism? So again, if we think of reparations in a spatial sense, we should be recognizing that the processes of colonization, such as land grabs, such as indigenous dispossession, such as ecological destruction, did not just take place by European states or European powers on indigenous peoples in the rest of the world, but they were fundamental, essential, necessary parts of the birth of industrial capitalism and have been an ongoing part of capitalism's continued expansion and reproduction. So these processes are mimicked in England, they're mimicked in Europe during the 19th, or even from the 14th century onwards, all the way through to the present day. Processes of colonization, of internal colonization, of land grabs, resource grabs have been going on. Is the colonization of Africa really separate from the long historical process of land enclosures in England and Europe that have wiped agrarian communities from the map and transformed them into landless wage workers with nothing but their labor to sell? Is it really separate? Is it different? Is the current exploitation of West African land and West African workers in the cocoa trade, or the current raw material extraction of cobalt and coltan and other metals and minerals, and the child laborers in DR Congo to supply our smartphones or electric cars, all the while enriching Apple, Elon Musk and Amazon to have unbelievable power in the world? Is that not to also be included in the demand for reparations and restorative justice, or do we just let that one slide because it's the present and it's not the past? So in conclusion, I think that the fight for reparations and the fight for restorative justice implies that we take seriously the question of quantifying, of mapping the scale and the spatial reach of colonization, of colonial destruction, of colonial extraction, but we also reject the idea that this is somehow an historical project that focuses also only on what Europe did to indigenous peoples outside of Europe. For me, and this is where I'm being provocative, and maybe there's going to be some pushback, Spatial reparations means that we seek to understand the true reach of colonial processes and relations over time, including the present, and we bring that into the wider reparatory agenda. I hope these reflections have been useful, and I hope you have a really productive conference, and I really look forward to learning the outcomes and engaging with you in the next stage of your work. Thank you very much for listening and watching, and good night.
That's Dr. Stuart Hodkinson of the School of Geography, University of Leeds, a close colleague of some of ours. I think it will be fair to ask if there are any questions. And we need to be quick about this so that we can go and have some food and then chat away more informally. So any questions? Particularly to Farah, who is here with us.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks so much, Farad. If I may, I was just wondering to what extent your position is representative of Die Linke as a party, and like kind of what the internal struggles are to kind of really anchor reparations and anti-imperialism in the party, particularly those of your colleagues that have been elected now. Ich kann es auf Deutsch nochmal sagen, gerne. Sorry. Also meine Frage ist, inwiefern die Position, die du repräsentiert hast, die ich völlig zustimme, repräsentativ ist in der Linken als Partei und gerade in den neuen Kollegen und Kolleginnen, die jetzt im Parlament sitzen, in der Rosa-Luxemburg-Stiftung, oder inwiefern da auch noch viel Arbeit zu tun ist, sozusagen die Partei und die Bewegung dorthin zu bringen, Reparationen so vollumfänglich zu unterstützen. Danke.
Also soweit ich weiß, ist das Reparationsthema in der Linken eigentlich genau so, wie ich es gesagt habe, und in der Rosa-Luxemburg-Stiftung auch. Aber dran arbeiten, optimieren kann man es immer, weil ich finde, auch die deutsche Linke, die hat da noch sehr viel Nachholbedarf.
You have a question as well?
Just to say, just follow up quick one. Yeah, the German left has work to do, but from your perspective, what are the next steps, in that?
So, die Leute kennen mich als der Aktivist im Parlament. Meine nächsten Schritte sind auf alle Fälle, die Ressourcen, die es im Parlament gibt, dafür zu nutzen, weiterhin die Kämpfe auf den Straßen zu stärken. Das heißt, ich habe jetzt mehr Ressourcen, mehr Sichtbarkeit, und deshalb werde ich ja auch aktuell von Springer Presse, von Tagesspiegel etc. angegriffen, die dann alte Sachen auskramen, wo ich mal gesagt habe, so, wir müssen die Polizei entwaffnen, abolish the police. Oder aufgrund heute beispielsweise, weil ich eine Wassermelone mit zum Einzug ins Parlament mitgenommen habe. Also, genau. Nur mal so, das sind schon alles kleine Kämpfe. Ich versuche Sichtbarkeit zu schaffen. Warum nehme ich eine Wassermelone mit? Weil es natürlich etwas Bestimmtes ausdrückt und ich mit dieser Message auch ins Parlament einziehen möchte. Gleichzeitig, genau, hat so eine Position halt auch monetäre Ressourcen, die ich dann natürlich auch nutzen werde, um darüber halt, wenn Menschen, wir zusammenarbeiten im Büro, wir sagen immer, wir sind ein Team, dann aber auch die Kämpfe hier in Neukölln. Ich habe einen sehr starken Neukölln-Fokus, das ist für mich wichtig, weil ich immer gesagt habe, die Revolution beginnt in Neukölln. Und ich finde, mit 2000 Menschen auf die Straßen im Wahlkampf, an 139.000 Haustüren, 50.000 Gespräche und dann die Stimmanteile mit vielen Menschen zusammen zu verdreifen. Ist ein Stück weit Revolution, aber ich bin immer noch der Meinung, man kann sich auf die Parlamente nicht verlassen. Die Angriffe, den Hates, den ich da in den Parlamenten erlebt habe, das zeigt eigentlich, dass die Angst, dass die Bewegungen ins Parlament kommen, eigentlich sehr hoch ist. Aber wir haben immer wieder durch parlamentarische Anfragen vor allem, beispielsweise am Beispiel der Schließung des OJUN, immer wieder Sachen aufgedeckt, was wir skandalisieren konnten. Also Finger in die Wunde drücken. Und ich glaube, um diese Ressourcen gut zu nutzen, ist es wichtig, dass ich viel stärker als jetzt, was es schon ist, mit den Bewegungen connected bin, weil die Fragen kommen meistens von den Bewegungen. Genau, ich habe selber auch Ideen, oder auch wenn ich eine Rede habe, 3 Minuten oder jetzt im Abgeordnetenhaus waren es 5 Minuten, habe ich die Hälfte meistens den Bewegungen gegeben, die zu dem Thema arbeiten und habe gesagt, ich lese einen Teil eurer Pressemitteilung vor. Ich glaube, ich sehe ein Stück weit meine Aufgabe darin, auch diese Politik anders machen, in die Linke reinzutragen, damit andere Abgeordnete das auch machen. Aber insgesamt muss sich die Politik ändern. Aber die Politik ändert sich nur, wenn wir von der Straße aus richtig Druck machen. Deshalb ist mein Fokus weiterhin auf der Straße. Und was für einen Themenbereich ich bekomme, weiß ich nicht. Ich würde gerne Antifaschismus und Antirassismus machen, aber das entscheide ich nicht selber. Genau.
Another question. Yeah. No, for the translation. Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
Okay. Again to you. I'm not from Berlin, so excuse me. I agree with most what you said, but I wondered whether the Jewish children in Ukraine aren't traumatized. Ich stimme mit den meisten überein, aber ich habe mich gefragt, ob die jüdischen Kinder in Neukölln nicht auch traumatisiert sind.
Also Kinder sind Kinder, wir sollten da keine Unterschiede machen. Und es ist klar, dass, genau, aber das ist sozusagen, die Gewalt gilt ja den pro-palästinensischen Protesten, wobei ich dieses Wort pro-palästinensisch ja schon falsch finde, weil es ist nicht pro-palästinensisch, es ist nicht pro-israelisch, sondern es ist pro-Menschenrechte. Aber hier gilt die Polizeigewalt schon hat einen sehr starken Fokus auf diese Jugendlichen, auf diese Menschen. Und deshalb erwähne ich das immer wieder, weil das halt in Neukölln schon ein klares Thema ist, was wir immer wieder erleben. Und diese Proteste werden kriminalisiert. Übrigens sind sehr viele jüdische Menschen auch auf diesen Protesten, die sich gegen den Genozid in Gaza stellen. Ja.
Right. It's important that we have these debates, but I really feel like we had so much input, and I would really invite you to continue these conversations with food and like nourish ourselves, get some energy, and we'll have plenty of these discussions for the next 2 days. A really great solidarity group has cooked amazing vegan West African food for us. They're trying to find donations for their friends from Cameroon who are currently trying to they're trying to get money for the lawyers to prevent deportation. So please donate also, and yeah, see you then tomorrow. We reconvene at 10 a.m. here in the auditorium before we can then go to the workshops. Thank you so much for today. And see you tomorrow.